It was a face, emerging from the wood grain of our office door that captivated me. Throughout the workday, filled with mundane tasks of checking emails and typing punch lists, fielding phone calls, I would study it. More than a nose, eyes, and a mouth, it had features like a little girl. No, more like a doll. A doll resembling a little girl with a page boy bob curling up on the ends and wearing an A-line dress. From my desk at the end of the long hall, I observed its disgusted scowl with brows pulled sharply together in a deep V and thick lines under the beady eyes. I enjoyed its sassy disapproval. Leaving at the end of the day, I would speak to her. Bye. See you tomorrow. Have a good night. Watch over the place, will you? She became sort of an office mascot. I mean, at least for me anyway. The only other person in the office was an architect, and I showed him the figure in the wood grain. Pointing it out, its specific features, it took him a while to see it. He didn't marvel over it the way that I did. I do kind of see it, he said. Now that's neat. He ignored my fascination with it, as he did my other eccentricities, but like my spiked armbands and blue-dyed underlayer of my bangs and, my political views, completely opposite from his. We agreed to disagree. I chalked it up as being one more thing that we saw differently. Now, while working alone in the office one day, something caught my attention from the corner of my eye. I could have sworn that the figure moved. I stared at it for a full minute, waiting for it to happen again. A passing car caused the light to shift through the window, and the shadow glided across the door. I laughed at my own gullibility. I began to call her Lucy, after the Peanuts trademark character, the one that pulls the football away. My boss, the architect, frequently left the office to check on job sites, and our office was small and quiet with only one person there, and sometimes I listened to music and I would sing out loud. I talked to myself too. Now, one time I was talking about my non-existent plans for the weekend, and I looked up at Lucy's unimpressed scowl. Well, don't look at me like that. Tell me what I should do. Silence enhanced her air of condemnation. Now, on a whim, I picked through my purse to retrieve a nickel from my pocketbook, remembering the iconic trope from the cartoon Peanuts, and Lucy was a psychoanalyst, and she had a psychoanalyst stand. I placed it on the opposite side of my desk facing the door. There you go. There's your 5 cents. Now, will you help me? My old friends are married homebodies, and why am I not making any new friends? What's wrong with me? My question went unanswered, and the scowl remained. I went home to my dog, and I ate tomato soup with popcorn. And watching the returns of a sci-fi TV show that I really loved from the early 2000s, I fell asleep on the couch. Now, in a dressing room, next week, after that, I sat on a little bench while buttoning a shirt when I noticed another face staring at me from the dressing room door. Details emerged, and the longer that I looked at it, squinty eyes, a long beard with a mustache covering the mouth, and thick eyebrows. The wood grain, it moved upward to a point, and it looked just like a gnome. I laughed at my own silliness. What were the chances of finding two well-defined faces in the wood grain of two different doors around the same time? Well, probably high. It was only that I was suddenly noticing them. Now, that weekend, I found a face in the speckled flooring of a fast food joint. The profile of a man's face caught my attention in the branches of a tree in my backyard. It wasn't my habit to look for shapes and clouds or anywhere else, but I was finding faces everywhere nonetheless. It was entertaining, but, a bit strange. I talked to Lucy about it. Are you sending your friends to check up on me? She scowled back at me like I was crazy. Fidgeting with my pen, I contemplated the uniqueness of seeing so many human-like faces in inhuman places. Isn't there folklore about spirits inhabiting trees and inanimate objects? There must be. If I were to have seen them in ancient times, surely that would be the conclusion that I would draw. It would be common sense, and if common sense reflects something true, then it should be eternal, right? If so, and if these faces represented something real, something otherworldly, why were they suddenly becoming visible to me? Was there something about me bringing them forward? Did these faces represent spirits wanting something from me? I went home to do another Friday night of tomato soup and popcorn and my miniature schnauzer and vintage sci-fi TV. Why should I miss having friends? I couldn't afford to go out anyway. Well, returning to work on Monday, I discovered my nickel was gone. The nickel that I had presented to Lucy for her psychoanalyst. She never came through for me, but I left the nickel there as kind of a superstitious offering. I'm not a superstitious person, but well, it seemed like fitting to leave it there. Almost like a contractual obligation. I engaged her services knowing full well that she wasn't going to answer, and so I should pay according to the arrangement. The missing nickel, it didn't register with me until I returned from lunch. Since I had become blind to it, I didn't know when it went missing. I asked my boss if he had picked up my nickel, but he didn't know anything about it. A strange man and a natural workaholic, and the things that he could notice or overlook would always surprise me. He liked to comment on my shoes because he had learned that ladies had always liked when people noticed their shoes. However, he didn't notice that I had rearranged my desk, putting the printer on the other side of the room, or for a couple of weeks. There was no doubt that he'd been oblivious to the nickel. Well, we were the only ones in the office. And every day it was just the two of us, and there was no one else to move it. After thoroughly searching up and down and around everything on my desk, well, I was just at a loss to explain what happened to it. Lucy must have finally taken it. That was the thought passing through my mind when I concluded it was just gone. It was a silly thought. The office was all mine the next day. Clicking my pen, I stared down the hall again and debating with myself over the ridiculousness of what I was considering. She's just a coincidental arrangement of markings on the wood grain. There's nothing to this. But it isn't coincidental if it can't be. There are other faces too, but how can it be anything but that? My brain was suddenly twisted into an odd inability to know what to believe. I erased all thought of maybe it could be something real or not real, but I don't know, it just kept coming back in my mind. I eased from my chair and I walked slowly down the hall to stand before the door. I studied Lucy's features as I had many times before, tracing her lines with a finger. I asked, "Are you real?" She scowled back at me like I had just asked the most idiotic question. I cursed my own stupidity and returned to my desk. Now, a few minutes later, I heard a voice. "It's about time." I looked up in surprise. Her unchanging scowl stared back at me. Was the voice only in my head? I couldn't describe its qualities. It didn't have characteristics like pitch or tone, so it must have been just in my brain. Yet it was a voice distinct from my own. I couldn't say anything back. I didn't have the nerve. Another couple of days went by with nothing unusual happening. I avoided looking at her, but I couldn't help occasionally glancing her way. I wouldn't speak to her either. Not even my customary goodbye at the end of the day. It was getting too weird. I didn't need to start hearing things, and I didn't want to invite it. But despite this, the voice had returned. My boss was in the office that day, engaged in a strained phone conversation with a client, challenging an invoice. You know he took it. I looked up at her. I looked behind me to my boss's desk. He was still on the phone, and it wasn't on speaker. I paused a moment before I looked back at Lucy, and her customary expression was unchanged. She was just a figure in the wood grain. I returned to work. He took the nickel. My eyes shut up. This time, the voice, it sounded more distinct. I stared at the figure staring back at me before looking towards my boss's desk again. He didn't react. Why should he? Besides the voice being most likely my imagination, he just was focused on his phone call. Why would he care about a nickel? I muttered under my breath. Silence answered me. Silence with a scowl. The weekend, it passed. I did my best not to think about the figure in the door down the hall. It was a distraction anyway. What really needed my attention was paying my bills. The boss came in late the next morning, having visited a job site first. He stopped at my desk to hand over a punch list for typing, while criticizing the contractor's unfinished sloppy caulking throughout the site. He stood directly in line with Lucy's face. I could see her disapproving gaze over the top of his shoulder. It was almost comical how my attention occasionally drifted toward her before snapping back to the architect, like we were both in on some kind of joke. "Yeah, I know, this guy's a tool, right?" I said to her in my thoughts. She didn't respond. But as I kept looking toward her over my shoulder, I started to realize something. Her scowl, it wasn't for me. It was for him. I had been misleading her disapproving expression all along, thinking it was meant for the world in general and perhaps for me as part of that world. But from that point on, I looked her way to appraise that condemnation, that stare, that glare that she had. I was free from her sassy disapproval, never having realized it weighed on me. When the boss became cringy or was being an ass or unreasonable, I looked towards her and she scorned his behavior in agreement with her scowl. After a few days, I began wondering what she had against him. How could she dislike him so intensely? I mean, he could be annoying, but not as bad as to warrant this seething hatred. What did he do, I wondered. Concentrating on that question while absent-mindedly twirling my pen in my hand, I suddenly remembered that our office building had once been a warehouse. It stored kitchen fixtures and appliances until a developer turned it into condominiums. And the architect on the project was my boss. The day that we moved in our office into that space, I felt like we didn't really belong. I thought it was because we were forcing a residential space to serve as an office. Could it have actually been because we were unwanted? Could it have been that my architect boss offended the warehouse spirits with his redesign? And then he had the nerve to move right in? I sat on that theory for a little while, waiting for the next occasion when my boss would be out of the office. It didn't happen that week. I went home on Friday and sat on my couch with my puppy and ate tomato soup with popcorn and worried about my bills. Monday morning was my chance to be alone in the office again, and it was time to have a heart-to-heart with Lucy. I contemplated what I wanted to say over interlaced fingers, and finally, settling my arms down on top of my desk, I leaned forward and I decided to confront the issue head on. Okay, what is it with you? Why are you so angry? Always angry. She just stared at me. It's the architect, isn't it? He messed up something for you. What? What happened? Silence. I couldn't think of what else to say, but I said, I can't help you if you don't talk to me, Lucy. Suddenly I remembered how I started calling her that, or whatever your name is. I don't really know your name. How am I supposed to know what to call you, though, if you don't tell me? I sighed. This wasn't working. I went around the credenza behind my desk to start filing. Alice, said the voice in my head. I looked up in surprised joy. She had never responded to me before. This was the first. You're real, I whispered and paused to listen. Are you going to talk to me now? Or is this all I get? Because I'll be honest, Alice, I'm getting tired of this one-sided relationship. She said nothing. In a temper, I kicked the filing cabinet. It didn't help. I kicked it again and again until it was dented. Looking back at Lucy or Alice or whatever her name was, her expression startled me. Did she actually look less angry? Was I imagining that the deep V between her eyes was less pronounced? The boss was back for the afternoon. I kept looking back at Alice to see if she was impacted by his presence in some kind of way. He's playing you. Now she chose to talk. Now when I can't respond to anything openly. Now 2 rooms off of the long hall were designed to be bedrooms, and each one had a bathroom. I preferred using the one at the furthest end. I left my desk as though I needed to go, and I headed towards it. Stopping in front of Alice, I silently stared at her a moment before slipping into the darkened bedroom that served as the office library with metal shelving, binders of specs, industry specification manuals, and architectural samples. What are you talking about? I whispered and waited. I don't have all day. Come on, tell me. Check his bag. What? How am I supposed to do that when he has it with him all day? She didn't answer. I returned to my desk. After a couple hours, the architect went to the restroom, and as soon as the door latched, I leapt into action. He sometimes had me retrieve papers from his bag, so I didn't expect to find anything surprising. Searching the smaller pockets, I found a loose nickel. Was that my nickel? There was no way to know. Well, continuing the search, I came across 2 checks written for monthly dues to his country club and his business club. The amount of them combined to well over $500. My hands, they shook as I looked at them. This was what he thought of me. I'd stayed with him when my paycheck was delayed because our client list dried up. During the real estate crisis, I stayed when the one remaining client denied the validity of an invoice and refused to pay. Even though I had to borrow money from my parents to make my mortgage note that month, I stayed. It wasn't his fault, so I never complained. But now I could see that while I was sympathetic to his struggle, mine was no concern to him. While I was worried about keeping my home, he made sure to remain in good standing with his social clubs. And while I was spending weekends alone eating tomato soup and popcorn, he didn't even sacrifice anything. I wanted to crumple those checks and throw them across the room. A flushing sound brought me back to the moment. Putting everything back as it was, I returned to my desk and pretended that I was absorbed in emails when he passed by. You see, I did see. I'd been a fool. And my boss, who had been like a father figure, was a traitor. Who was in my corner? Not him. Not my old friends. Where were they? According to social media, they were still hanging out with each other, but not with me. The truth was that they didn't just shift to focusing on their families. They left me behind. After a bad breakup, my friendship became inconvenient. He remained their friend. I became expendable. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. Staring at the email client open on my screen with burning eyes, I clicked to create a new message. Dear Sir, we regret the error in our most recent invoice. Services rendered to another client were mistakenly attributed to you. Please disregard. The idea to undermine my boss with the remaining client that was contesting his last invoice was a rash move, I know. I wanted to make it so that he couldn't afford those dumb club dues anymore. I hit send before I could even think twice. But seconds later, panic set in. I pulled up my sent folder, straining to breathe. Too late. I stared absently at the timestamp that proved that it was done. My stomach had dropped. The architect could lose his business, and I would lose my job. The doll figure in the wood grain looked different somehow. Her scowl, it was no longer disapproving. It appeared menacingly satisfied. You did it. I knew what she meant. I really did it. And Alice approved.